your full name is, where, and when were you born?
So my full name is Valerie Lyles Patterson Abdul Hakim. I was born at Jackson Hospital, but grew up in Coconut Grove. And do I have to give the year? Is that yes? 1955.
And what is your connection to historic Overtown?
Okay, so my connection to historic Overtown would have to start with my mother, who actually, she grew up in the Grove. She attended Booker T. Washington High School and graduated in the class of 1954, right? And so over the years, I would hear stories about my mother going to Booker T. She also worked at the St. John Nursery School there on 3rd Avenue, and I would hear these stories about working at the nursery school and working for Reverend Johnson. On occasion, she would bring me, even though I attended St. Albans Nursery School in Coconut Grove, on occasion, she would bring me to the nursery school at St. John's to be there with her. So that was one of the connections. Another connection to Overtown was the fact that my grandfather Cab, who I call the original snowbird, would live in New York during the summers, and in the winters he would come down to Miami and stay at the Sir John Hotel. And so one of my fondest memories, probably in the let's see, I want to say that probably 62 or 63, my grandfather Cab, while he was in town, gave me a pool party at the Sir John Hotel. And so my birthday is in October, and I remember that it was one of the coldest October 27th in the history of Octobers. And so here I am, like 7 or 8. My grandfather gives me a pool party in October at the Sir John Hotel. I recall that 2 people came to my birthday party, right? And one of them was my bestie, who actually is the granddaughter of Dr. W.B. Sawyer, and who lived in Overtown. So she came, one other child and myself, and I just remember it being so cold in the pool, but we actually, we got to swim. So that's another Overtown connection that I have. Let's see. And then, years later, early 2000s, I was appointed to the board of the St. John CDC. And as a part of my relationship and membership on the board, we, for fundraising, we created this initiative that I named. It was a cooking event, right? So the Deltas were having the Deltas Gents cooking event, and someone who was working with us was like, yeah, we can do a cooking event to raise funds for the CDC. And I coined this term, things are cooking in Overtown, right? And so for many years, we worked on that event. We held this initiative. We would have it on Jungle Island, and then we had it at some of the hotels downtown. But that relationship with St. John CDC gave me the opportunity to come into Overtown more than I had in the past. And so, as I was saying, whether you grew up in the Grove or Liberty City or Richmond Heights or Overtown, Brownsville, Coconut Grove, there are all these connections. People from the Grove who attended school at Booker T. Washington, and traverse back and forth this idea of what's identified as Overtown was came out of people saying that they're going over town because they're going to pass through downtown to get here. Also in the 90s, I know I was missing, in the 90s, my first experiences working as a part of a research initiative was on a transportation project that the university, a relationship that the university had with the Metropolitan Planning Organization, and the MPO was interested in examining the impact of transportation on Overtown. And so I participated in that project. I was right out of completing my doctoral program, and that also brought me back to Overtown in a more intentional way. I participated in the activities that we held to collect oral histories from the people of Overtown, people who are current residents, and getting their reflections on the adverse impact of I-95 and other transportation projects on the people of Overtown. So learning that history where you had thousands of people, I-95 comes through and people are dispersed. They end up having to leave and move to other parts of the county. But prior to that time, it's that whole vibrancy of mixed income community, or people very similar in some ways to Coconut Grove, in the sense where your neighbors could be from various walks of life. They could be working professionals, they could be attorneys, physicians, homemakers. And so we looked at how 95 adversely impacted Overtown. And so we think about the whole idea of the Harlem of the South, right? And so asking people, what I noticed was fascinating is, depending on who you talk to, the nostalgia and longing for days past, the vibrancy, my bestie Bernice Sawyer, whose family owned the Mary Elizabeth Hotel, and listening to her mother, right, Miss Sawyer, my 9th grade English homeroom teacher, listening to her tell the stories about Joe Louis and Cab Calloway and other artists who had to live in the hotel, right? And because they were performing on Miami Beach, but they had to live in the hotel, and so what that was like, hearing my bestie Bernice talk about her cousin having a birthday party in the Zebra Lounge at the hotel, and Muhammad Ali coming through, and picking up the kids and having a great time with them. So also, visiting, spending the night with Bernice, and her bedroom was the entire floor of an apartment building, and that was so different from what I was used to. And so thinking about the past, and then again, people longing for a return to those days, and thinking about how a neighborhood, and I think it happened more here because of 95, less in the Grove, right? Because there wasn't a major transportation project that came through. But how people reminisce, about that time and what it was like. And so when we did the Things Are Cooking event that very first year, we created these invitations, right? so there was an honorary committee, honorary chair, and there was a working chair. That was the working chair. But we had an honorary chair, people who lent their names to the event. But that very first year, the theme was revival of the glory. And so since that time, and thinking about Overtown, I'm always struck by this idea of if there's a constant thread or theme, it's the revival of the glory. And so how does that happen, right? So that was a long rambling connection of how that's my Overtown story.
Thank you for sharing. It gives us a good idea of about your Overtown, the historic Overtown. You mentioned some of your fondest memories, like your birthday party. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me any other of the fondest memories that you would have had in historic Overtown? May it be a place, person, people, or a celebration.
Right. So definitely the going to visit Bernice, and having that experience with her over the years before her parents left and made their transition, going to visit them and seeing all of the history that was there in that family, and the pictures and the images, and having that discussion of what it was like, right, in during their time. Definitely being on 3rd Avenue, seeing the historic churches and the buildings are all memorable for me. And then, like, again, listening to the stories that my mother would tell about how, for the kids from the Grove who came to Booker T, that the kids who grew up in Overtown felt some kind of way about them, and so I think it was that the Grove kids from the Grove had, like, there was some urban legend associated with the kids from the Grove versus the kids from Overtown. Hearing about Booker T, right, and the not the largest but the best, right, and seeing Booker T, seeing old images of Booker T, and then remembering that time when it was shut. It went from a senior high school to, I think it went up to maybe 9th grade, and then seeing it come back, right? That how excited I was because that happened, because it usually doesn't. When schools are closed, when upper level grades are eliminated, I think it's rare for them to come back, but through the perseverance, they have a very strong alumni association, and again, so much history, so many important people, people who are important to historic preservation, whether you're talking about Dr. Pinckney, if you're talking about Dr. Fields, the Black Archives being here, the Lyric Theater, and the police precinct, like all of that history right here, right? And that there are dedicated group of individuals who are working to collect and preserve that history, and hopefully passing that drive and the values of the importance of historic preservation, right? So that makes me excited and happy, and when I think of Overtown.
What are some of the crisis events that historic Overtown has experienced? Can you tell me a little bit about was how was historic Overtown affected, and how were you, if at all, affected personally by these crises? And when I say crises, we're thinking extreme weather, heat, climate, housing. You mentioned the 95 displacement.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that.
I don't know. So I really think that when we think of disasters, and I know for the purposes of this work, we're thinking about weather-related disasters, right? But for me, I would categorize the 95, the devastation, the displacement, the elimination of housing, as a catastrophic and an extreme event that impacted the community, right? And so with a long lasting impact. And so clearly you start thinking about desegregation, right? And so thinking about, for instance, the Sawyers and some of the historic clubs, the nightclubs, right? That they were thriving businesses. Whether it's Dr. Robinson talked about the bicycle shop, or thriving businesses that had clientele and customers, right? Who supported those businesses. And then, that displacement that took part as a result of both the 95, right? And also desegregation / integration, depending on who you talk to, that where people decided to move, so you left Overtown and maybe you went to Liberty City, or maybe you went to North Miami, or maybe you went to Carroll City, or you became financially secure, you became and then you start moving into other neighborhoods. And so again, it's can be disastrous and in that respect, right? So thinking about what it must be like to have grown up in a neighborhood and been able to walk to your high school or elementary school, and your junior high, I think it's called middle school now, and then that disappears, right? And it, it happened in Coconut Grove with G.W. Carver. So thinking about how disruptive that may be, having teachers who you grew up with and you knew them, and then having them then transferred out to other schools and other parts of the city, that that clearly must have had an impact. So it's that the housing, again, when I was with St. John CDC, the focus was on affordable housing, right? So the importance of affordable housing. And, that was 20 years ago. And then thinking about how much affordable housing has been built, again, and who is living in that affordable housing, and are the needs of the community being served. So housing, climate, right, if you will. So I know Brickell floods during in extreme weather events. Is there flooding here, and how are people impacted? Access to community education, food desert. So we've had that discussion, right, over the years about where are the major food stores. In terms of housing, in terms of transportation, it was interesting. So when we were working on the the project that looked at the impact of 95, like one of the hardest metro rail stations to get in and out of was the Overtown station, right? So it's like you arrive, and then it's like what? So what's next? How do you get into Overtown? So it's if you're working class and if you don't have transportation, how do you get from place to place? So creating access to transportation, that may be a challenge for some people. Access to education, right? Schools and schools that prepare students in the way that they need to be prepared. It's that. Again, the whole climate, displacement, and you fast forward. So we looked at 95 and 1998, and then during COVID, lo and behold, there's some more interstate transportation, changes coming. And so I was about to say is, like, definitely one of the things we found out was when we were working on that project in 98 that the people who kind of designed at the state level, who participated, like, they had never been to the Overtown station, so they didn't know like what was happening in terms of accessibility and getting out in and out. And so again, it's the importance of community driven solutions to the challenges that exist. So the importance of us looking out, right, in the ways that we can, but also the importance of making sure that, and the work that Catalyst is doing, for example, making sure that the solutions kind of bubble up from the people who are being impacted in multiple ways.
Thank you for highlighting and describing these different crises events that have happened in the past, present, and even future. I do want to ask, how are you personally affected by all those things that you listed when you think about historical Overtown? Like, how do you personally?
Right. So for me, it's again the navigation, right? That when I started coming back to Overtown, which was the late 1990s into the early 2000s, and the whole navigating around the space and the one-way streets and one of the challenges during that time was even parking. Like, so where do you park? Do you have to pay for parking? What about, again, public transportation? So back in the day, in the 50s and 60s, the number 12 is the bus that you caught. And I was a public transportation girl, so I knew about buses and bus routes. So the number 12, or the number 21, it was the number 21 was the bus that you caught if you were trying to get to Overtown. But like, what are the bus routes like now? What kind of connections are they accessible? Do people have access in a way that allows them to go from place to place to place? So even the exits off of 95, like, are those exits taking me to where where I'm trying to get? And so in the early days of being on a board, if I was on the South Campus of FIU, or if I was on the North Campus of FIU, sometimes I would be late for meetings based on like what route, whether I was going to go on 95 or I was going to 826 or 836. How was I going to get there? So it's thinking about personally that access for me, but understanding that in a way I have certain privileges, like I have a car, right, and I have a profession that with flexibility that allows me to come and go as I please. But what about the people who don't? So that's the challenge. And why isn't public transportation more accessible for people who need public transportation? Why aren't there jobs and opportunities that are more accessible for people who need them?
How do you, or how have you seen in the past, how has Historic Overtown responded to the crisis that you discussed?
Mm-hmm. Right. So I think that again, there have always been, talk about loyalty to a neighborhood. So I remember when I first started working on St. John CDC that I was from the Grove. I said I was from the Grove, and it's kind of like, but the people who are actually from Overtown, so when they say towners for life, the folks in Overtown, so people may have moved to other parts of the county, but they're going to come for the historic St. Agnes. They're going to come for church services. They're going to come for events that the church may have. For Greater Bethel, they're going to come to Greater Bethel. St. John St. John Church, MBC, they're going to come for those. They're going to be committed and very supportive of Overtown. And so there's this connection. Bahamian descent people from other parts of the country. It is that collective familial connection that, again, means a lot when someone tells you that they are from Overtown. And they feel very strongly and remain committed to making sure that, there's support, there's advocacy, working with elected officials, et cetera, to get things done.
What do you see now as the most serious threat to Historic Overtown?
So, for 2 years during COVID, I didn't come to Overtown because everyone was on remote and everyone was on lockdown. And so when when Bernice came back, I went to visit her, and she's over on 3rd Avenue, and I remember driving in for the first time in 2 years, and this space where her condo building, which is a space that her family owned at one point, but was sold, and they developed housing. And going there for the first time in 2 years, and seeing that the parking of where she lived, where we would park on the grass, that they had put like a 8-story building on that space, and a huge, not connected to them, this is another developer, 8-story building, huge how is it even possible that? And then driving on Third or Second Avenue and seeing another ramp from 395 or whatever, just staring at me as I'm driving along, like it just came from out of the sky and stopped. And then if I wasn't careful, it would probably fall on me because it looked like they just stopped mid creating the ramp. And so I think it's again, the transportation projects are causing some disruption, disbursement. It's that. It's also these huge housing structures going up, and the neighborhood changes, and really is it how does that impact the culture and the history of the people who've been here all along? Will they be able to afford to move into that housing, and what kind of reception? I keep thinking, we talk about food deserts, and then you say, well, where's the major stores? And I don't want to call any particular stores, but we know the stores that I'm speaking of. It's like, okay, but having one that is right here in the neighborhood, that may hopefully eliminate some of the food deserts that exist, but ultimately, what does that suggest though? You know how the marketing for some of the major burger, it's like they only build where they know that it's going to be an explosion of new residents who will need their services, and so that's my concern. Like, well, the whole idea of creating and developing and building on the history of the past, right, and preserving the culture of the community, like how long will that be sustained? So that's my greatest concern. Will that be sustained? And so that's why it's important to, definitely preserve and document this history, so people don't ever forget.
Thank you. What do you think would help to protect historic Overtown from these threats?
So definitely when like the Lyric and other the Colonel, the bottle company, and other the major churches, when they're declared historic, that's some preservation, right? And that's helpful. But we know about Purvis Young, and we know about his impact as an artist, and we have the Black Archives, where we know that history is there and being preserved. And so it's the green space. It's again ensuring that the ideas, the solutions that to challenges that the community faces, that they're listened to, generated from the community itself, and ensuring that people are not priced out of where they live, and that the emphasis and focus, so the historic Ward rooming house, that kind of preservation, I think is what's important to ensuring that the community survives.
What would make historic Overtown more able to bounce back from these crisis events in the future?
Well, again, it's thinking about, okay, is it wind? Is it flooding? You know, what is it? What opportunities exist? The whole awareness and knowledge of the needs of the community, that people are being listened to. So back in the late 90s, there was a Overtown Advisory Board, right? So you have that. I remember the Overtown Youth Center, when just the idea was floated, when I was on the board of St. John CDC, and you know, was funded, and look at it now, some 20 plus years later. So again, listening and supporting, especially elected officials, and for the community to insist that elected officials are held accountable, you know, so for our public administration side, to making sure that people are listened to, that, you know, their needs are being met, that they have access to elected officials, access to affordable housing, access to transportation that gets them to places, and access to living wages, so people can, you know, sustain themselves and survive in the community.
What do you want people to know or remember about you and the historic Overtown community?
So what I want people to know about me is that while I grew up in Coconut Grove, that I understand the connections and linkages between my Grove family and their Overtown experience, that history of my family's experiences and linkages to Overtown, very near and dear to my heart. And I know that Overtown is very important to the creation of what we now know as Miami, and that, you know, I'm dedicated to ensuring that the history is preserved and making a contribution where I can to that, preserving that history.
When you're thinking about your grandkids,
Mm-hmm.
what are your hopes for them when it comes to Coconut Grove?
Mm-hmm.
And what do you want them to know about you and the family? What do you want your daughters to remember about you and your husband? What is that story of you, please?
Right. So for me, it's for me, it's definitely that we have a strong family history, right? That we're descendants of folk who came from the Bahamas in 1916. The women who were dedicated to ensuring that, you know, their family survived and was successful, and were able to live a better life than they were able to on the out island where they lived. And so that we have this very strong family history and legacy that started then. We have legacy on the paternal side. And my husband has a legacy of family from northern Florida. On my side, the paternal side, legacy from South Carolina, right? And so there are questions that I should have asked when my grandmother was still alive. There are questions I should have asked when there were elders who I grew up knowing who are still alive. There are questions about Overtown that I should have asked the Sawyers when they were still alive. And so what I want my children and grandchildren to understand is that it's important to ask the questions and learn the history and make sure that it's passed from generation to generation, because it's so strong, right? And that, so you have these women who came over, and they built this 2-story home, and all of us, we've always had extended family around us and living with us in multiple ways, and that it's about the collective. It's like Ubuntu, right? I am because we are. And so that's the what I hope is what my children and my grandchildren and my great grands and great great grands will know and will pass and carry on in subsequent generations.
Thank you. I want to bring you to my last question as we conclude. What brings you the most joy? What brings you the most pride when you think about historic Overtown?
What brings me the most joy is that I know that some of these buildings, some of these locations of memory are still here, and that many of the stories are being preserved and have been preserved, and that are accessible, right? So that brings me joy. The time that I spent working with St. John CDC and doing that work and engaging and interacting with the Things Are Cooking in Overtown event, that gives me a lot of pride and joy, because it was, and I think it's still going on. I haven't been in a few years, COVID years. I don't think they did the event, but what we did was every year we would celebrate at least 10 individuals who made a contribution to Overtown. So I'm really happy and joyful that documentation is there to look back on, and again, hoping that there's a model for others to follow, subsequent generations.
With final thoughts, what are you most concerned about when you think about the historic Overtown?
I think what I'm most concerned about is that the mistakes of the past might be repeated. It's like there are lessons, right? Related to displacement, related to people being forced to leave, related to gentrification and development that again forces people to have to leave because they can't afford it. That there are lessons. I'm most concerned about the repeating of mistakes. It's like, why do we write? Why do we research? Why do we offer reports? We have the work of others, and why aren't we learning the lessons? So that's my greatest fear, that we won't learn the lessons and we'll repeat them.
Thank you.